Welcome to this inaugural meeting that launches our series of workshops on developing the next generation of research leaders for sustainable development. The workshops are aimed at creating networking opportunities, particularly for researchers in the early stages of their careers. WUN is offering the series in collaboration with the UN's Sustainable Development Solutions Network and with UNESCO. WUN is unusual among international university networks in having a focus on research. Two of our principal purposes are to foster distinctive international research collaborations directed at problems of global significance and to nurture research talent. WUN has historically helped nurture talent through a mobility program aimed at early career researchers. Now, that program, along with many of the other means by which researchers establish their collaborative networks, has been upended by COVID-19. So the series of workshops WUN is now launching with its partners responds to the constraints we're living with by providing a vehicle to help researchers find peers who have related interests. But we're not viewing these workshops just as a stopgap until life gets back to normal. If there is a success, we will have created a vehicle for enlarging opportunity generally, and especially for researchers whose freedom to collaborate internationally has historically been limited by financial or other restrictions on travel. The workshops also have a very important second purpose: to introduce research opportunities in fields that are at the heart of WUN's mission, now focused on sustainable development. There are no richer research challenges of global significance than those represented by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm very pleased that, in collaboration with the SDSN, each of the subsequent workshops will be devoted to one of the goals and the research challenges that attend it. Today's session has several parts. In the first, Jeffrey Sachs, President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, will discuss the importance of the SDGs and the rich opportunities they offer for research on problems of real importance. After Jeff has spoken, there will be little time for questions. Following that, I'll say a little about why sustainable development is a strategic focus that WUN can pursue with greatest advantage. And then Mike Hassan-Muller will say a few words about how the main workshop series will operate in subsequent sessions. So without further ado, let me introduce the man who, better than anyone, can characterize the importance of the SDGs and why we should engage the research problems embodied in them. Jeffrey Sachs, who holds a distinguished appointment as University Professor at Columbia University, is a world-renowned economist who has worked extensively on problems of global significance, including poverty, human-induced climate change, and the control of disease. Perhaps more than anyone, he has elevated our awareness of the need for sustainable development and energized a discussion within universities of how to best tackle the research challenges it presents. He established and is a director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He is also the president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which, through education, research, and policy analysis, promotes integrated approaches to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Jeff now also serves as chair of the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, an interdisciplinary initiative across the health sciences, business, finance, and public policy, created to help speed up global, equitable, and lasting solutions to the pandemic. I'm delighted that he's able to be with us today to frame the challenges and opportunities. Over to you, Jeff.
Peter, thank you very much. And to researchers around the world, I'm really honored and delighted to have some time with you today. Warm greetings, hoping that you are safe and thriving even in this very weird and very difficult time that we're in. COVID-19 exemplifies the kind of serious, the dire, complex challenges that are part of the sustainable development agenda. To address COVID-19 requires a an all-disciplinary strategy. We need expertise in public health, in medicine, in socioeconomics, in sociology, in various dimensions of public policy. We're not succeeding right now in most parts of the world in containing the pandemic. It's running out of control in the United States and in much of Europe. Very successful societies by many dimensions, but showing the tremendous limits of our governance and our interdisciplinary capacities facing a crisis like COVID-19. Unfortunately, we're facing a range of crises that are calling upon us to come forward with new approaches, better understanding, and above all, the capacity to work across a wide range of disciplines in order to hone in on more effective solutions to the challenges that we face. Let me spend a couple of minutes giving you a quick background on the Sustainable Development Goals that Peter just mentioned. I'm sure you're familiar with them, but maybe a little bit of perspective is helpful. And then talk about the way that I myself am trying to think about these goals and the kinds of research challenges that they pose. The reason we have sustainable development goals is that the world economic and political systems are not producing the kinds of societies that we're hoping for. We're hoping for societies that are broadly prosperous, that are socially inclusive and just, and that are sustainable in many dimensions, but perhaps most basically in the biophysical dimension, that we will survive and that the planet under our stewardship will be sustained in a way to provide a quality of life for not only our generation, but for generations to come. That intergenerational notion of sustainable development was first brought forward to the world in 1987 by Dr. Gro Brundtland and a commission that she led as Prime Minister of Norway at the time in the lead up to the Rio Earth Summit. It was already coming to our global realization that there was a kind of collision course between economic development and the physical environment. This was first recognized diplomatically in 1972 in a Stockholm global conference on the world economy and development, and then followed up by the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. At the Rio Earth Summit, 3 crucial treaties were adopted on climate change, biodiversity, and fighting land degradation or the spread of deserts. And those 3 treaties seem to be a hallmark of global cooperation and accomplishment to head off environmental disasters. Alas, that was 28 years ago, but those environmental threats have only multiplied. And it was 20 years after the Rio Earth Summit that governments got together and said, we're in such a mess. Our treaties are not functioning properly. We need to strengthen our commitments to sustainable development. And so in 2012, governments agreed to adopt goals that were more clear, time-bound, and universal, engaging all 193 UN member states. They negotiated for 3 years, and in September 2015, adopted Agenda 2030, a transformative agenda for sustainable development. And within Agenda 2030 are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. A few weeks after that, in December 2015, the same 193 UN member states adopted the Paris Climate Agreement. This sets our agenda. The basis of the agenda can be put both as an intergenerational stewardship, that each generation stewards the planet in a way to protect the needs of future generations. It's also put succinctly as a mode of global socioeconomic development that is conducive of prosperity, of social inclusion, and of environmental sustainability, or the triple bottom line of economic, social, and environmental objectives. At one level, I also think of this sustainable development agenda as manifesting basic human rights as spelled out already now 72 years ago in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where it was recognized that as a matter of basic human dignity, every person on the planet has an inherent human right to healthcare, to education, to social protection, to livelihoods, and to the means of living a dignified life in their societies. And so we're still at it today. Now, we have these goals because, as I said at the outset, the world's socioeconomic systems or system of systems do not lead in any natural way to sustainable development. The world economy does tend to produce economic growth and rising outputs per person, but with two very deep flaws. One is huge inequalities and inequities in the economic outcomes. So a widening inequality in the world, including several parts of the world that are stuck with extreme poverty and deprivation, and within our societies, inequalities between the rich and the poor that have grown over time rather than narrowed in most societies, including my own in the United States. Secondly, this economic growth has been inimical of environmental sustainability, and we're really facing four mega environmental crises, not just one. COVID-19 itself as just the latest of a spate of zoonotic diseases, diseases that involve the transfer of pathogens from animal to human populations, has shown the instability of human relations with the biosphere, because whether it's SARS or now SARS-CoV-2, the pathogen, the virus that causes COVID-19, or MERS or Ebola or Nipah virus or a cascade of other emerging diseases. We're disturbing nature, and nature is in the process creating emerging diseases in human populations by this transfer of pathogens from animal populations in these zoonotic events. Second is climate change. Of course, we're all utterly familiar not only with the pathway of a destabilized climate, but the failure of world society to this point to get ahead of this growing danger. The third major environmental crisis is the loss of biodiversity, which is pervasive and evidenced in so many ways, including loss of species abundance and collapse of whole orders or classes of species. And the fourth dire environmental crisis is massive pollution, both in air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, ocean pollution, toxic chemicals, plastics, a range of pollutants. So this is the big challenge. That's why you as leading young researchers of sustainable development are so much needed. We need a new approach to how our economies and societies function, and we need technological transformations that will enable us to benefit from technology and to continue to enjoy improving living standards, especially in places that are still poor today, but in a way that is consistent with environmental sustainability and with social justice. When you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they run the gamut from overcoming basic deprivations, including ending extreme poverty, SDG 1, and hunger, SDG 2, to ensuring universal access to these human rights, SDG 3, universal health coverage, SDG 4, universal access to quality education, SDG 6, universal access to water and sanitation, SDG 7, universal access to modern energy services based on zero carbon energy sources. And combining this with environmental sustainability, for example, sustainable cities, SDG 11, circular economy to reduce pollutants, SDG 12, climate safety, SDG 13, marine ecosystem sustainability, SDG 14, and terrestrial ecosystem sustainability, SDG 15. There are also goals about global cooperation, SDG 17, and about peace and social inclusion in our societies, SDG 16, something we desperately need in the United States these days, where society is coming apart at the seams, it often feels. So how to solve these problems is a massive political, geopolitical, and intellectual puzzle. And the amount of expert input and intellectual input we need in this is profound. How do we know what is marine sustainability other than through sophisticated oceanography and marine ecology? How do we know whether we're protecting biodiversity or not, except for very sophisticated geospatial analysis of biodiversity and understanding the underlying ecology? How can we move to climate safety other than through sophisticated transformations of our energy systems to low carbon or zero carbon energy systems, which involve many different transformations ahead, a power generation system based on wind and solar, each one of those requiring sophisticated advances of technologies, the grid management, which is itself a highly complex system requiring storage, dispatchability, resilience in the context of a high load of intermittent renewable energy sources, moving to electric vehicles, and so on. But each of those solutions also triggers other questions. What are we going to use the vehicles for in the future in a world of e-commerce or work online or shifting patterns of the economy? What kind of mobility or transport services do we need? Well, you put all of this together, you can see that every one of the specialized disciplines, from basic Earth system sciences, oceanography, climatology, ecology, to a wide range of engineering sciences, information technology, civil engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, artificial intelligence systems, and so forth, to a wide range of policy sciences. I like to use the term science. I wish they were a bit more scientific, but economics, politics, and other social sciences are all commingled in any of the solution directions that we're going to need. And the human sciences, from neuroscience and psychology and behavioral sciences, are going to be absolutely vital for us to understand how our societies are working and how we can help people to flourish in this time of change and disruption. It's a big, quite thrilling intellectual challenge and a massive policy and political challenge. It is not easy. Most of these crises and challenges require global cooperation, which is itself extremely complex in a world of 193 UN nation states and 7.8 billion people, and not all seeing eye to eye, I can tell you. So finding ways to get agreements and shared pathways forward is one of the biggest challenges. It's a near miracle, in fact, that we have globally agreed goals to begin with. What an accomplishment that there are 17 goals that all nations of the world have signed up to, and that we have a Paris Climate Agreement that all nations of the world have signed up to. Incidentally, the United States is the one country that's basically pulled out of these agreements since 2015 under Trump. And that's why next week's election in the United States is so significant, because we have to get back into these agreements to be a part of global solutions, not just a part of the global mess. I like to think of the design of solutions according to 6 major transformations of our society needed. And I'll be very, very brief. These 6, as we see that at the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, are first, the transformation of our societies to high skills, quality education, and capacity to undertake research itself. And so the whole education and research agenda design of our countries, our world, needs to be upgraded. The second major area is health, the transformation truly to what we have long proclaimed, the right to all for health, and health in its broad sense of human well-being and flourishing, not only freedom from disease, but the flourishing of individuals in society. Third is the transformation to a zero carbon energy system and an industrial ecology that looks after its own wastes, the so-called circular economy. The fourth major transformation is to sustainable land use and especially sustainable farm systems. Because farming and agriculture more generally is the single biggest driver of anthropogenic change in the Earth's systems. The fifth major transformation is to sustainable cities. We have 55% of the world population by one count, even up to 70% by a second classification, living in cities. That number will continue to rise. We have to geo-design our cities so that they are livable, productive, and safe. And the sixth major transformation that I would regard as quite crucial for the Sustainable Development Goals is the digital transformation, what we're living with this moment as we share this online platform together. Digital technologies are transforming research. They're transforming the way we address problems, and they're transforming our lives in a fundamental way. COVID-19 has pushed digitalization by one estimate at about 25 times the rate that it had been proceeding. We've suddenly moved on to an online world in healthcare, in education, in e-commerce, in work from home, in e-governance. And this digital transformation will change jobs, income distributions, our daily lives, and the way we want to design cities for e-commerce as a major transformation of maybe we can end the traffic jams that go along with rush hours if we don't have rush hours anymore, because half the work is being done remotely and largely from home. something that has become quite realistic, we've seen just in recent months. So these 6 big transformations in education, health, industry, land use, urban design, and the digital world give us a huge set of fascinating research challenges and questions. How do you make a transformation to net zero energy systems? What will e-commerce mean for the geo-design of cities? What would self-driving vehicles do in terms of transport mobility within cities? How do we know if we are engaging truly in sustainable land practices? By what standards? By what kind of monitoring? How do we use remote sensing systems, satellite data and local remote sensing systems to better measure biodiversity or to send alerts? Why is it that our governance has been so poor in addressing COVID-19? The questions are basically unending and fascinating. What I've learned in my research on these issues over the past quarter century is that they require a collaboration across disciplines, that there is nothing more exciting than learning from your peers that are working hard in another area and can open up a whole world of knowledge to you, and that finally, these are solvable problems. These are not beyond our capacity to solve, but they are hugely challenging problems. It could not be a more exciting time for us as researchers, and a more gratifying time, I might add, to be engaged in problem solving for sustainable development. Thanks a lot for the chance to be with you this morning. And I think we're going to have time for at least a little bit of discussion. And I want to thank our partners. SDSN is really honored and thrilled to partner with Worldwide Universities Network. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jeffrey. The questions we have received center on 2 broad themes that I would like to put to you. Firstly, are there emerging and unique opportunities in the context of the pandemic to enable early career researchers to foreground the SDGs in their research? And secondly, how can we as researchers make the most impact in public policy? What advice, in your experience, would you give for translating research to impact, especially when faced with the challenges of disciplinary silos at universities?
I see several opportunities right now for our engagement as researchers. Many governments, not my own in the United States yet, but I'm hoping for a change next week in our elections, but many governments are announcing transformative agendas in a context that they hope will be post-COVID-19. We're still very much in COVID-19, but the European Union, for example, has adopted the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal puts together 3 major goals. It puts together decarbonization for climate change, the circular economy for reducing wastes and pollutants, and the so-called farm to fork strategy for sustainable land use. So it's very much a holistic approach to the environmental challenges. And within Europe, every government, all 27 members of the European Union, need to align national policies with this new European Green Deal. And within every country, municipalities, the large cities, need to create strategies for decarbonization, for sustainable land use, for reduced waste or increased recycling and so forth. So the agenda is there. China has just announced its intention to reach net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2060. Japan has announced its intention to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Every one of those policy commitments opens up a research agenda. And the politicians don't know how to do these things. They are setting goals, but they cannot, by their very nature of their work and their expertise, be the ones to lead the solutions. These require sophisticated technical and analytics. I believe universities have a unique role to play in helping to design pathways and to explain what to do, as well as to incubate new technologies, of course, in the bench lab work, as well as in the incubation of startup businesses. Universities have a unique role to play. How can we be more actively engaged? Partly WUN can help on that. SDSN can help on that through our networked projects and programs. Partly each university needs to take this on within its own local and national context. And I know many, many universities working with their cities to suppress the epidemic, or working with the national governments on the new ecological agenda, for instance. SDSN yesterday, just by coincidence, launched a new report that we call the Zero Carbon Action Plan, that was put together by about 100 researchers in an online network during the past 6 months of how the United States can reach net zero emissions by 2050. For me, it was a wonderful project of a voluntary group coming together, very, very low budget, because people donated their times to work across multiple sectors: building sector, industrial sector, power generation sector, transport sector, public policy, law, economics, to put together a strategy that I think will make a lot of sense and can make a real contribution if Vice President Biden is elected president, because he's already said that he wants to lead a US effort towards net zero by 2050. And what ZCAP, this Zero Carbon Action Plan, does is show how this can be done in a detailed way, drawing on expertise across a number of sectors. So we have to be a bit ad hoc, look for opportunities, step forward and offer solutions, work as a network, engage with governments, and engage with the business community, because businesses are also, in many cases, searching for sustainable solutions for their own sectors. Some are not. Some are trying to promote or preserve or protect the old polluting industries, but there are many that are trying to make a breakthrough, looking forward, for example, to sustainable agriculture or to renewable energy.
Thank you, Jeff, very much for these remarks. It's been wonderful to have this all-encompassing assessment of the opportunities that I hope will engage our young researchers and fire them up to tackle what are unquestionably the most important challenges facing us now. So thank you very much for
Peter,
yes.
You and I will, of course, continue to brainstorm on how we can help the young researchers and connect them into global networks. But I hope we do get them fired up to work on these issues. And thanks to WUN for the leadership. And let's figure out how to be as practical and helpful as possible. This is an exciting career path, but we need these young researchers.
Absolutely.
Very importantly.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Great. Take care. Have a great session.
Thank you. I'd like now to say a few words about why WUN is going to be useful to you, how it can be useful to you. Why should researchers who are busy people and generally good at developing their own collegial networks want to engage with a network like WUN? How does it add value? The answer is layered, I think, from general to specific. So let me start by saying a few words about generally why a network like WUN can be helpful. The lifeblood of a major university is the intellectual talent represented in its academic staff and faculty and in its students. Major universities compete hard for the most outstanding individuals, and most of the universities are well connected internationally because the connections enlarge their access to talent. It's no secret that the world's most successful research universities have on their faculties large numbers of researchers from other countries. The similarity of missions among major universities everywhere, and the similar ways in which they're organized, make it relatively easy for researchers from different countries to fit in productively, both as resident members of the university and as collaborating visitors. All this makes successful university research a truly and necessarily global enterprise. So with all this international engagement already, how does a university get value from a network? The key lies in the fact that despite all their similarities, the universities in the network sit in very different geographical, cultural, and legal contexts that not only shape how they support research and deliver education, but also provide them with distinctive and varied perspectives on many really important research problems. This is where the network comes in. It adds major value because by capitalizing on the varied geographies and cultures of its members, it can assemble and support diverse sets of collaborators to tackle major research problems in fields where comparative analysis matters. That is, where you need different perspectives to have a decent chance of tackling the problem. Let me be a bit more specific. What kinds of research problems benefit from being taken on by culturally and geographically diverse teams of researchers? Generally, it won't be problems in the fundamental physical and biological sciences. Now, by this, I don't mean that international teams are unimportant in the fundamental sciences. It's obvious that such teams are immensely important. Just think of particle physics or astronomy, big science generally, and you know that international teams are essential. My point is that the geographical and cultural diversity of the collaborators is not key, or in many instances even relevant. However, beyond the fundamental physical and biological sciences, there's a huge array of major research problems for which assembling teams with diverse backgrounds confers real advantage. Now, perhaps nowhere exemplifies the opportunity better than the SDGs. If you consider them from goal 1 right through goal 17, what's striking is that the challenges in reaching the goals, although they'll depend to a considerable extent on securing advances in the basic sciences, are in many important respects even more dependent on changing behavior, about getting people to do things differently and exploit technological and basic science solutions differently, and in a coordinated way everywhere around the world. Given this emphasis on understanding and altering behavior, and the need to do that on a global scale, an essential first step is to understand how the problems are expressed and perceived in different countries and cultures. And the second step is to look at the problem comparatively. Where among these varied contexts has progress been good or bad? What circumstances make progress possible in one place but not another? We see that the problems to be addressed in the decade of action are precisely those that a diverse network like WUN can tackle with real advantage. This is why WUN has adopted sustainable development as a framing principle for its current strategic plan, and why we've become so involved with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network in moving the agenda forward. Let me finish briefly by saying a few words about how you can become engaged with WUN. The network provides a wide conduit to interesting and sometimes surprising international research collaborations. Many of them address real-world problems. Some offer opportunities for researchers to deploy their disciplinary expertise in new ways. And you can see the full range of the things we do on our website. The principal historical mechanism for starting research projects is our Research Development Fund. This provides small seed grants to bring people together to plan and start collaborations. It's very much intended to ensure that partners from across the network are brought together. In fact, it requires that 2 or more partners be engaged in the project. We encourage these from very diverse backgrounds. It's an annual competition, closing in October, and there's a limited submission which is run by each university individually. Fields within sustainable development generally, and specifically now on how our recovery from the pandemic can be harnessed as a driver of sustainable development, are the fields in which we welcome applications now. Within each university, the program is accessible through the university's coordinator, who represents WUN in many respects internally. And if you're interested, you can learn more from your university's coordinator. Now, at present, our mechanisms for finding project partners are informal and rely on coordinators exchanging information with each other and being able to communicate opportunities within their universities. But we're working now on a more robust mechanism for finding collaborators. In particular, a new database accessible through our website will enable researchers, first of all, to post invitations for collaborators to join projects, and second, to make known their availability as potential collaborators. Now, of course, we hope this workshop series will become an additional mechanism for seeding projects, and we're eager to learn from you of other ways in which WUN can be helpful in starting collaborative initiatives. So with that, I'll close and hand over now to Mike Hassemuller, who will say a little bit about how we'll develop this initiative in the following workshops that in the series. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks to all of you who submitted questions for our guest, Professor Sachs. We were only able to get to a couple of these as he could only stay with us for a certain amount of time due to another engagement, but we appreciate the questions that you sent through. I'm going to take just a few minutes now to provide further detail on the networking webinars that will make up the heart of this program and that will roll out over the coming months. So as Peter mentioned, we will hold 17 networking webinars, each aligned with a particular sustainable development goal, to help early career researchers from WUN member universities build their international networks around areas of common research interest. For the purpose of this program, we define early career researchers as a researcher who is either in the final year of their PhD or equivalent program, or is within 5 years of having been awarded the degree. The age of the researcher has no bearing on the definition, and career breaks within this period do not count against the total. Let me give you some idea of what a networking webinar will look like. And the best way for me to do that is to illustrate this with a practical example. As I noted, we'll be covering all 17 SDGs one by one over the coming months. But let's take SDG 14, Life Below Water, as my networking webinar example to illustrate what these will look like. What we would do is we would start with brief remarks from one to two speakers aligned with the theme, similar to how we've done today with Jeff and Peter, followed by a chance for participants to ask questions. When this part of the program's finished, we will then invite participants to proceed to breakout rooms that correspond to their area of research interest that have been set up in advance. For example, with SDG 14, there could be rooms on microplastics in the oceans, acidification, offshore infrastructure, fisheries, species conservation, just to name a few. But how do we determine these breakout rooms? Well, during the registration process, what we'll do is we'll ask registrants to identify their particular area of research interest within the SDG that we're covering at that networking webinar. And then we'll create breakout rooms that together and accommodate as many specific areas of interest that are indicated as possible. So when you go to the breakout room that corresponds with your particular area of interest, this will be a time for you to introduce yourselves and your research interest to your colleagues, to one another, to chat about potential projects or projects that you're currently working on to get to know one another, similar to what you would do in person at a research conference. You can exchange contact information, and there will be an opportunity to exchange your professional profile with colleagues as you wish. You can also create a private one-to-one meeting room if you'd like to follow up with a particular person for further discussion. We hope to announce the first networking webinar, and we currently expect that will take place in late November soon. So to make sure you don't miss the events that correspond to your area of interest, I recommend the following options. In the coming days, we'll be sending a follow-up email that will include a link to subscribe if you would like to be sent information on these upcoming networking webinars as they're announced. You can also regularly visit our website, wun.ac.uk, for program updates. You can subscribe to our Twitter feed at WUN Network, where we will also announce upcoming networking webinars. As Peter mentioned, each WUN university has a local coordinator, and it's always good to keep in touch with them. They will be helping us to promote the networking webinars at your institution. And we've included a link to the WUN webpage that contains the contact details of your local coordinator in the chat function on this Zoom webinar. Finally, as Peter mentioned, we're in the process of establishing the central database that when it's launched, will be accessible on our website for all WUN researchers, including early career researchers, to post their profiles, and emerging projects as another tool to help build collaboration. I just wanted to mention that again. When this is ready, we'll send out an announcement and invite you all to participate in this networking database to help advance your international connections and projects. As always, feel free to contact us with any feedback on how we can be most useful, including how we can make the most of this opportunity, our series, special development series, career development series for early career researchers. And we'd be happy to have your input and to help that shape the program so it is the best, so it achieves the most value possible for our participants. So thanks very much. And now back to Peter for final comments.
Thanks, Mike. I'd just like to close by thanking all of you who joined us. We hope this has been helpful to you. We're eager to ensure that the series generally is as valuable as it possibly can be. So we'd welcome feedback both on how we should organize it and on particular content that you would be eager to see. Anything that we can do to help develop collaborative networks is important in this enterprise, and we'd very much welcome your views on how best to achieve it. So finally, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at subsequent workshops. Goodbye.